Finland. Different time zone, long place, far away from California. Our special guest today is Michael Gates, and he's coming to us from a town just south of Helsinki in Finland. Also on the show today is Nanna Hänninen, and she's coming to us today from a town 400 kilometers north of Helsinki, both in Finland. Michael Gates is the vice chairman of the Richard Lewis Communications Organization. He's also a senior fellow at Said Business School, part of University of Oxford in England. Michael Gates is world-renowned as an expert in cross-cultural understanding, cross-cultural communications in a business context. Nanna Hänninen has developed a new business method called the NEMO method, and it focuses on professional photography and how people look at the same image and see different things, and then communicating about those differences. Interesting, isn't it? Let's welcome Michael Gates and Nanna Hänninen. Hi, this is Ed Cohen. I'm in San Diego, California, and we're really honored to have Michael Gates, Vice Chair of Richard Lewis Communications and also Associate Fellow of the Said School, part of Oxford University. Michael Gates is a world-renowned expert on cross-culture and communications. We're going to talk today about all of that, particularly branding and authenticity and agreements between people. In today's world, we need to be safe and clean and trustworthy. And a lot of that goes to understanding people from different cultures, time zones, across silos. We also have with us Nanna Hänninen, also from Finland, so thank you. And she's got a great new idea called the NEMO method, and we're going to hear about that too. So first, let's quickly go to Michael Gates. Please say hello, and if I made a mistake or left something out of the intro about yourself, please add it in now.
No, thanks, Ed. You got everything absolutely right.
Oh,
and I have been on this program once before, a couple of years ago, so it's great to be back.
Yeah, this is great. Also online, as I mentioned, Nanna Hänninen, please say hi.
Hi, Ed. It's nice to be with you again.
Yeah, that's great. So you're located, if I remember correctly, 400 kilometers north of Helsinki?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Kuopio.
And Michael is located somewhat south of Helsinki, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's still very light here, and it'll continue light most of the night.
Well, it's summertime finally came to San Diego area. It's been quite cool along the coast, but it was been in the 80s Fahrenheit, and so we're going to the beach after we get done with this show. So I wanted to get right into our conversation about culture and understanding and people problems connected with not understanding culture and not understanding how to behave properly. I'm probably saying that incorrectly. Michael, please correct me.
No, you were perfectly okay. And I mean, I would say that it's not just about problems. What we've always got to look for in culture is about the opportunity for greater understanding. So I wouldn't frame it as a problem maybe, but as an opportunity.
Okay, that's really good. Okay, so tell us about your role as an associate fellow at the Said Business School.
Well, I've been working at Said for about 10 years now, and the main thing that I teach is cross-cultural negotiation. So we get a group of business people, usually business, also government, from around the world, many different nationalities. They all have a common challenge, which is how to negotiate more effectively and add the cultural dimension to it.
All right, and that's great. And so do you conduct classes virtually today?
Yeah, I mean, over the past few weeks, I've been doing many classes virtually. In fact, next week, I've got one of our Oxford programs, which is going to be virtual. So absolutely, it's increasing. Took a few weeks, maybe a couple of weeks to sort of kick off as people recovered from the shock of having to work virtually and be trained virtually, but it's really picking up.
Okay, so now what is the hottest topic in your sessions, in your classes? What's the hottest topic right now?
Well, right now it's working in remote teams, because I think a lot of people are feeling a bit zoomed out, or whatever method they use to communicate, after the initial worries about the technology, which people are gradually getting used to. It's a very linear medium, and on the one hand, that kind of advantages. I have a friend in Italy who's Australian, and a few months ago, before all the lockdown, she was saying, I can't deal with these Italians. They're so unlike me. You know, they're unstructured, they're turning up late for meetings, they don't follow an agenda, they get very emotional. She said, it's been wonderful. Now we're working virtually, it's very linear. But I think, although virtual is quite a linear transactional medium, we're soon going to need really the skills of people who are good at dealing with emotion, with relationships.
Yeah, so I want to bring in Nanna. Nanna is an educator and also a specialist in imagery using professional photography. Nanna, you can do a lot better explaining that NEMO method than I can. So please tell us a bit about yourself and the NEMO method.
Okay, so I'm originally a photographic artist, and I have a long career as being a professional artist, and have been showing my art all around the world. And at some point, I realized that somehow art that I'm using, which has lots of concepts and emotions and ideas, it's kind of remains untouched when it's only on the gallery wall or museum wall. So I wanted to bring art and images into the organizational use, into the work life. So I designed the NEMO method.
And the NEMO method looks at photograph, various photos, and then what, you have discussions about its meaning?
Yes, we use photographic art to low down the barriers between people, so that they can communicate with each other more freely, more authentically. And we also make our customers to photograph themselves, which actually brings the true authenticity into the discussion, because people really truly stand behind their photographs and their stories among the pictures. So this brings people really close to each other in these workshops and sessions that we run.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, do you notice an interpretation really different between people from different cultures?
The funny thing is that people are more or less people everywhere. So people have same kind of emotions and same kind of feelings about being trustful or being afraid. This is very universal, actually.
Great. Michael, what do you think about that?
Well, I would agree. It sounds like a fantastic method for bringing people together. And research into diverse teams has shown that the number one thing that successful diverse teams do is that they have a clear understanding of themselves and the others in the team. And I think through photographs of yourself, that's a very good way of presenting who you really are. And everyone gets to understand others better. And then I would say the second rule is that it's very important to build bridges. And I'm sure that images and art can really build bridges. As regards everyone being the same, I agree up to a point. And you know, when people are really under severe pressure, they have the same needs, universal needs. But there's a level at which culture comes to the fore under a crisis. So, and I think we see that through the fact that during the current crisis and even before it, populism and nationalism unfortunately have grown. And when people are under severe pressure like that, their cultural characteristics can come to the front, and they defend their culture and start attacking other cultures, which is very sad.
In one of your previous, please go right ahead, Nanna.
I would have a great image for Michael, great artwork to show for Michael about this defense mechanism that we have.
You must send it afterwards.
Yeah, I can show it.
Oh, you can show it.
Yeah, it's just here.
I-
This image is called. Can you see it?
Oh,
Yeah,
half of his face. Yeah.
Yes, it's half of a man's face, and this image is called "The Arrogance as Defense." And it talks about that we have these defense mechanisms, all of us, and especially arrogant people. They may have a very soft core in them, but they have to protect that core, and they have to defend themselves from the others, from the unknown, from imaginary fear, for example. I just wanted to show it quickly to you.
Yeah, well, I think that's really cool. I love what you're doing. I think it's just dynamite. I'm in visual anyway, but learning about the science in that is really cool. So we're going to have more people joining us. There's some in the waiting room right now, and so when they come in, we'll ask them to intro themselves. So meanwhile, Michael, there's a lot of problems here in the U.S. and certainly in other places too, but seems to be magnified with all the media going on right now. And I'm not getting into politicals at all, but just business for me. And the stress that people are under, not just working from home, but the worry about the economy or getting sick, then all of the above, and then the political situation as discussed in the media. It's craziness. It's making people nuts. So how can you, as a leader, as a thought leader in cross-cultural communications and knowing about all the different cultures and how people interpret things and express things, give us your outlook, please. And first of all, give us a quick overview of, if I remember right, you had a presentation a while back showing a few slides and different colors and representing the different personality types or cultural types of how they interpret things. So would you mind going through that real quick?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. The way that we look at culture as a means of trying to bridge gaps, not as a means of putting people in boxes, is to divide into three main cultural types, some of which are more prominent or seen more easily in certain parts of the world. So the first type I mentioned briefly, the term linear before, and we depict that as a blue color. And it represents cultures or people who are rather cool, factual, decisive planners. So that is one of the key things about them. What we call multi-active cultures are people who are warm, emotional, quite talkative, and sometimes a little bit rash, impulsive. Whereas what we call reactive cultures, and multi-active is red, and then our yellow color is what we call reactive. And these are reflective listening types or cultures. And they're very polite, they tend to believe in harmony, etc. So I think it's fairly easy to see which parts of the world tend to fall into which category. So Northern Europe, North America, fairly linear. Multi-active tends to be South America, Southern Europe. Reactive is quite a lot of those East Asian cultures.
Let's talk about the linear. If you could focus with us on linear and North America, Northern Europe. So this means just give me the facts, straightforward, tell me what I need to know.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. It's exactly that. Facts. It's what Aristotle would call in persuasion logos. So the logical, rational world, research, science, all those types of things.
Yeah, and the reactive is that, would you say that's Southern European?
No, multi-active would be Southern European. That's the red, warm, emotional, talkative, impulsive.
Yeah.
And
So
then
would you say that Brazil, Argentina is in
Yeah.
that too?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say they would fall into that sort of category. But
Yeah.
of course, every individual is different. And I've
Yeah.
met quite a few rather linear Brazilians, many of them.
Yeah, right. So Nanna, in this regard that we're talking about right now, would you show different images, different photography, or would you use the same photography to get these three major aspects delineated?
Well, I actually choose images according to the topic that we are going through. If we have a strategic process or value process going on, I choose images that I know that have a certain effect, or in their topic they fit well into the main topic that we are dealing with the customer. If we are, for example, dealing with sustainable growth, for example, I could show images like this, which is called the melting ice, melting sea ice, the Arctic sea ice, which is this comments to the climate change, for example, and then we can talk about the sustainability. So I choose images more according to the topic itself.
Ah, good. Michael, in your business school classes, could you describe your students? Who are they?
Well, a lot of them are CEOs, so or some from big firms, some from their own companies. They're usually fairly senior executives, probably an average age of mid-40s. And whether they're in the private or the public sector, one thing they all have in common is that they have to try and reach good agreements, whether those are about money or whether they're about other things. Somehow they have to be able to enter a negotiation in the spirit of getting a win-win for everyone, and having a good idea of the biases, both psychological and cultural, that could impact their decision making, and then also be able to understand how to persuade people by projecting yourself into their world and framing the way in which you're communicating with them in ways which will resonate with people who may be different from you.
So what do you think of video and imagery? I think it's super cool and right on if it's not manipulative.
Yeah, I mean, it's very useful, video, and I mean, of course, it can be manipulative, but that sort of takes me on to the idea of advertising and branding, and I know that's a topic close to your heart, and it's quite interesting how some branding, some advertising can be quite universal, but as you move to things which are specific to a particular culture, I mean, if you take food, if you take bread as an example, I've looked at advertisements for bread all over the world, and they're extremely different. And the advertisers generally try and tap into that culture.
Yeah, I would think healthiness, grains, or thickness, or with the right spread and all, that's cultural, isn't it?
It's absolutely culture. I mean, there's one that I use in my training sessions, which is actually from Finland, and it's for a special Finnish bread called jälkiuuni leipä, which is bread which is very hard and it's left in the oven.
Thin crust?
Well, no, it's not like that thin crust one. It's thick and chewy, and it's left in the oven. So it's not brittle. It's thick and chewy. Very good
So
exercise.
what kind of spread do you like to put on it?
You can put anything on it, really. Probably not jam. This taste is quite strong. It's rye bread. But the advertisement which I show is very grim and very bleak, and it's an exaggerated stereotype of Finnish culture. And there's a little boy there and his father, and they hardly exchange a word. And the boy is left by the father to cut the bread himself, and then he ends up cutting himself. And it represents this very powerful Finnish concept of sisu, which is guts, never giving up. And it's meant to be ironic, it's meant to be humorous. I mean, Finns aren't like that at home these days. Finnish audience responds in general very well to it because they find it very humorous. When I've shown it in India, for example, people get very depressed and say, this is such a miserable country. These people have no compassion.
Okay, so now, Michael, I want to ask you about the changing economy. Well, particularly in the U.S. here, it's like multi-track economy. The top level, top 1%, and people who are working in that level, who are not owners, but they're working in that level, they're rocketing along and nothing's changed. And then the total bottom is a terrible situation, and it's getting worse. And then there's this vast middle with a lot of unknowns about the impact of COVID and getting back to business, if you will, in light of no vaccine and no pills yet, you know. So there's big risk going on. So how would you characterize culture, understanding all this stuff going on and all these risks?
Well, that's a very big question. And if I knew the answer, I would probably be doing a different job. But what I would say is that, of course, there are many different layers of culture. And while I'm normally working with national culture, there are many different cultures within the US, both regional, social, political. And I think there's a danger when those different cultural groupings find it difficult to communicate with each other. Yeah. And of course, in the US, with your history, you had regional differences and differences in ideology, which led to civil war. And I think at any period when society gets polarized for whatever reason, I mean, we had it in the UK with Brexit, and without getting political, you've also obviously had it in the US with bigger gaps of difference between Republicans and Democrats, and even within Republicans as to who supports which leader. That is, I think, very dangerous for society. And then the society starts to, or parts of society start to reject their own culture. And we saw it this week in the UK when there's been a wave of statues being destroyed. And I mean, even yesterday, the Mayor of London covered up the statue of Winston Churchill outside the Houses of Parliament because he was considered too divisive, and it was, partly to protect the statue. So those divisions are very dangerous.
So yeah, there needs to be somehow somebody as smart as you out there in politics to help bring people together, but there doesn't seem to be that person willing to speak up yet.
Well, I think, and I want to give other people a chance to speak, but just very briefly on that while I think of it.
Please.
I think one of the main keys to leadership, particularly in a crisis, is communication and trying to have common goals. And by involving others as much as possible in decision making, and by listening more, and listening, no matter how much people talk about it, they still don't do it enough, is very important. And also framing your message. And I think to be successful in communicating a message which has a common goal, to go back to Aristotle, first of all, you have to have the facts right, you have to be transparent about the facts, and you should be seen to be telling the truth because you are telling the truth. And if you've screwed up, then you admit that you've screwed up quickly, because people are quite willing to forgive failings of competence or capability. Second, you need to have what Aristotle called ethos, which is character and credibility. And if you show failings of character, then those are a lot harder to forgive. So, for example, if you're the government chief scientist or chief advisor, and you've been laying down the rules about social distancing, and then you break them, even if you didn't break them, but you're perceived to have broken them, then that's a failing or perceived failing of character. And then finally, you need to have pathos, which is connected to emotion. And it's putting yourself on the same wavelength as others and understanding how to communicate with them in a way that shows that you can put yourself in their shoes. None of this is easy.
Yeah. Nanna, all these words create images in my mind, and I'm sure in yours, where you could, for instance, show one picture about pathos and another one about the gutsiness and never giving up, and then another one is being more passive. There's all kinds of ways that people could interpret those things, correct?
Yes, exactly. And I think it's very important for us to understand who we are ourselves. And when we first understand who we are, and then we can start to communicate with each other. And it's very important to kind of stay open-minded to other people's thinking. And that's why we use actually images, because that barrier between people kind of drops down, and we can actually start to understand how we think, how differently we actually think, how we perceive things, and how we understand things, our thinking. The images kind of visualize our thinking, I would say. So it's a lot about pathos.
Yeah. So Michael, would you say that, and we're just playing right now, but would you say that a proper leader would talk to each segment of the population in a different way, maybe not on the same day, but to address the needs with imagery and with some kind of a plan that will relieve pressure just by talking about what's very special to their cultural needs and their approach, and then perhaps another day they go to another level?
I think you've got to be very careful with that, because you've got to remember authenticity. And many years ago, Tony Blair got into problems because he was at his constituency seat in the north of England, and the local newspaper said, "What's your favorite food?" And he said, "Fish and chips," which is a sort of, well, it's not purely working class, but it's very basic English food. And then only a short time later, he was interviewed close to where he lives, in a rather nice part of London, by the local paper. And they said, "What's your favorite food?" And he said, "Pasta and sun-dried tomatoes." Well, obviously people pick up on that. You're altering your message. So I think authenticity is very important. If you think of leaders who have done it badly in communicating and the ones who've done it well, one who I think was a classic case of communicating badly in a crisis was the managing director of BP at the time of the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico,
yes.
about a decade ago, Tony Hayward. And he famously said, "I want my life back." Well, that was authentic. He did want his life back, but it was absolutely lacking in pathos, absolutely lacking in putting himself in the shoes of all the people who'd suffered enormously. Two very good examples. One of them American. I think your current governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, is pretty good at talking about the crisis. You know, he says it straight, he says it clearly. And then globally, Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, has been extremely good.
Very effective.
And she was great at the time when there was that very awful terrorist attack last year. I was actually in New Zealand at the time, and you know, she came across as very human and vulnerable. And what was very interesting in how she's been speaking recently is she's calling New Zealand our team of 6 million people, which is a great way to bring people together. And New Zealand's a great team players, both in sport and in business. And their leadership style is very much that in a crisis, the captain goes into team player mode or team captain mode. And she really plugged into that. So I think culture can be a challenge in a crisis. So, you know, things like America first, whatever you think about it, is challenging for some people, or this foreign virus, for example. That's where populism comes to the surface. But it can also be a very good way to communicate with people if you understand their culture and you frame your communication in a way which speaks to them.
So in context of your professorship at Said and the top business people that you're apparently dealing with, they have to deal with governments. And so public policy, private enterprise, public-private partnerships is the answer somehow. So I would think that the role that you play and what Richard Lewis Communications does is so important today, right now, to remove emotion and talk about how to do things, how to fix things, maybe get a series of small wins, one right after another, to build confidence and build up leadership. How would you communicate that kind of a thing to your business class?
Well, I think it's very easy when you are in some sense opposed to someone, or you're set against them, whether in a political situation or negotiation, to stick to positions. One side says, I must have this, the other side says, I must have that. And it ends up like a kid's playground argument. But negotiation, and negotiation as a very broad concept, isn't about that. Negotiation is about understanding interests, not positions. So what are your interests? What are the other party's interests? So if you were talking about the private sector and government, their interests might be rather different. It's only by exploring those interests that you can reach agreements which actually satisfy both parties. And that's very important. And in communication, as my very good friend Lucian Hudson, whom I interviewed a couple of weeks ago, said, Lucian was in charge of BBC's global output the night of the death of Princess Diana. He's also worked as head of communications for the British government, advising on communication in Downing Street in the cabinet office. And he said very wisely, words can hurt and words can heal. Words can hurt and words can heal. So my message would be, try and use words which heal rather than ones which hurt.
So I'm not going to ask for anything that you don't want to talk about. So just tell me to be quiet or say something different if you don't like what I'm going to say. But there's going to be a change someday, soon probably, in the leadership of the monarchy in England. And do you anticipate there'll be great changes, or just something that will just sort of morph into a new generation with perhaps Prince William doing much more than he is now?
Well, I think there will be change. I mean, of course, the line of succession is that Charles would take over. And, you know, he's been getting ready for the job for all his life.
Yes.
So I don't think he's going to miss the opportunity and skip to William. I don't think that would happen. His style is likely to be rather different from the Queen's. He has shown that he wants to get more involved in expressing his views, right, than the Queen did, certainly as Prince of Wales. Whether that will continue when he's monarch or not, I'm not sure, but I think it will.
Well, very much he's into weather and environment and
climate change and
climate change, and I think there's a real leadership vacuum there, and that could be really interesting from my personal point of view.
Yeah, he's he's willing to engage with many different topics. But then one has the question as to what is the monarchy's role. And the Queen, I think, has been exemplary in her ability to remain neutral, but also to be an ear and also an advisor to the Prime Minister of the day. Because don't forget, she's sat down once a week with every single Prime Minister since Winston Churchill. So nobody has as much personal length of experience and wisdom.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. So I don't think she'll do a book. Do you?
No.
I don't think so. No, I don't get so. Nanna, come on back in and talk to us about what's going on in Finland from an imagery point of view. Now, is it so that generally speaking, people in Finland are expressive through visual?
Well, I think all around the world, people are expressing themselves right now visually. People take and share billions of images every day, and this is no different in Finland or in any other country. People who are using smartphones and social media. So yes, people are expressing themselves with images.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Well, this has been a really fascinating conversation, and I thank you both for being involved, and I invite you to come back again to perhaps go to another level on some of these topics. Michael, what's coming up for you this fall? Do you think there'll be real live classes?
Well, I hope so. Yeah. I'm actually really missing the travel. I should have been just returned from New York around now, but that's off. Before that, I should have been in New Zealand. Before that, I should have been in the UK. Before that, India. So that's, lockdown. I've missed out on a lot of travel, so I'm missing it. But I do think that the new normal will very much involve things like this, remote discussions, remote training. But it is more tiring, and I hope for more of a blend in the future. But I can't wait to get on a plane again.
I wish you well. That's great. Nanna, thanks very much. What's coming up for you, for instance, in Silicon Valley, where you have a presence?
Well, hopefully we get new coaches into our Nemo coach training, which is coming up in the fall. We just had our first remote training because we also had to, change very fast into virtual trainings and virtual workshops. So we hope to have many coaches from Silicon Valley joining our next Nemo coach training. We actually have a new co-founder from Silicon Valley, so that's a big news, actually.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you for being my guest again on Global TV. We're going to close this off now and have a great weekend. And I know you're already into it, and we're going to the beach, as I mentioned earlier, and going for a long walk along the water, and then have a drink.
Oh, amazing.
So, thank you, Michael, very much for doing it.
Thank you, and nice to meet
really
you.
Appreciate you.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Michael.